When thinking of the Middle Ages and chivalry, many people would be excused for picturing a knight in shining armour jousting atop his horse to win the hand of a beautiful maiden. But how accurate would that picture be? Today we will be exploring what those jousts were really about, how they worked, their rules and variations, their evolution throughout the centuries, as well as their often overlooked social and cultural contexts. Welcome to our video on medieval jousting, tourneys and tournaments. Once you're done learning all this, we'd also like to invite you to use this knowledge, because this video is sponsored by Paradox, makers of the new Tours and Tournaments DLC for Crusader Kings 3. This is a new expansion that gives you great options for interacting with your domain. Firstly, you can tour around with a chosen retinue and get up to no good, inspect your vassals, solve issues that are usually far from a ruler's reach, and generally have a cool customizable adventure in your realm. Secondly, of course, they're adding tournaments, in which either your own character or your chosen knights can compete for glory, money, or romance, and the prestige of hosting a grand tournament is half the reward on its own. The expansion also features new wedding options, including the ability to dazzle the world with grand ceremonies and a load of new art and character outfits that evolve based on the time period. All this will be released on May 11th, but it's also worth knowing that Tours and Tournaments is included in the Chapter 2 DLC bundle, which is only $5 more and comes with another DLC up front and 2 more in the future, making it a cheap way to get all of them as soon as possible. You can order or pre-order Tours and Tournaments and the Chapter 2 bundle via our link in the description. In order to understand jousting, we first need a basic grasp of the world in which it was developed. Throughout the Middle Ages, warfare was a constant reality that affected all aspects of life and all layers of society. But one group shouldered the burdens of battle more than the others. In Europe, all nobility, from the tiniest feudal lords to the mightiest princes, covered a growingly exclusive role in the military, in no small part thanks to the predominance of mounted combat. This power brought with it responsibilities, such as leading risky attacks or holding wavering front lines. In any given battle, the actions of the knightly class were directly accountable for most military outcomes, and the bar was set high. Not every boy of noble birth was fit for a knight's duties, and any aspirant had to be thoroughly tested before he could be accepted as one. It is no wonder then that eventually a system was developed to contain and harness the violent energies of both enthusiastic aspirants and hardened veterans, whose entire lives revolved around the art of war. In early 12th century France, the tournament was officially born. Also called tourney, it was a way to establish one's worth in times of peace, when doing so on the battlefield was not feasible, and to gain glory and prestige in the process. These early events played out much like real-life pitched battles, with 2 squadrons of knights facing off in a war game played in the countryside. Not too many details have survived to us from this early form of proto-jousting, but we know that this game sometimes involved the storming and capture of small fortresses that acted as objectives, and that some scoring systems were used to determine the winning team. Proper battlefield tactics were employed in the frequent melees, and while the intent was usually to submit or capture opponents, casualties were not uncommon in the frenzy of the fight, which was often carried out in full gear. Indeed, aside from training for upcoming campaigns and proving their worth, knights could also use the tournaments as an excuse to settle scores, right wrongs, and feed fuel into raging family feuds. This was neither shocking nor unjustified at the time, but the church began to strongly condemn tournaments due to these bloody side effects, openly advocating for their abolition, and even going so far as to forbid the burial of tournament casualties on consecrated soil, basically excommunicating them in death. Nonetheless, these war games not only persisted, but evolved, together with knightly culture. While knights' unmatched value as military assets was confirmed, their role within society transcended. As the 12th century progressed, chivalry, seen as a conglomerate of primarily military values up to that point, began to encompass more courtly preoccupations. A vital component of this process was the introduction of romance. Arthurian legend, at the time insanely popular among European princely and royal courts, served as one of the main propellants for this new reality. Its tales of courteous love, mixed with bravery, permeated the courtly aristocratic culture and catalyzed a new component of tourneys, competing for love. Typically, this is depicted in modern media as the hand of the lady being the actual prize of the competition. In reality, a maiden's hand was less the official reward and more so an unspoken consequence of any knight's good performance. Tournaments became the privileged place of courtly love and often resulted in scandalous instances of adultery. Accounts of the highly erotic atmosphere of such events are common, and a strong symbolic meaning accompanies the romantic one. One famous version of a lady wearing only her chosen knight's blood-soaked shirt after the day's fighting showcases this perfectly. These relationships were not just a way to entertain Arthurian rhetoric, but also to breed the following generations of knights and maidens. In other terms, the next generation of elites. Now, tourneys weren't only a means of demonstrating a knight's skill in fighting, they were also a chance for him to mate with or even wed a prominent noblewoman, and therefore pass on to his offspring enormous riches, status, and hopefully nobiliary titles. A completely new kind of tournament was developed in the 13th century to give ambitious knights a chance to shine. The classic tournament was a team game. A team's success could bring individuals great distinction, but winning required efficient cooperation. The new joust emerged as an additional venue for knights to flaunt their prowess and increase their individual renown when tournaments and courtly etiquette came together. The fundamentals of jousting were nothing new. Before the main tournament, practice rounds had always been held. Young or unknown knights looking for recognition rode out to engage in single combat. The new, better planned joust was hardly any more complex. Two warriors rode towards one another, protecting themselves with shields and aiming with spears as they attempted to dismount their opponent. The jousters frequently agreed to complete a set number of courses before stopping. The typical goal or criteria for winning in early jousting was to unseat the opponent. The winner would have received the loser's horse, which was typically his most precious possession. Most frequently, neither fighter achieved a clear victory, and the matchup ended with the two men taking home just the deserved amount of glory. We can easily imagine how this rather informal competition would have gradually evolved into a preferred replacement for the initial tourney. Jousts were simpler to organize, and made for a great spectator sport. Indeed, these new tournaments became of ever greater social importance, not only to the active participants. As the joust grew relevant, so too did the pool of people it attracted. Since not just anybody could participate, those who followed the spectacle as spectators displayed their status by just attending. This could allow them to prove they were worthy of whatever position they held, or to find access to new, better ones, such as in the retinue of some lord. The figure of the herald, which is often depicted as an official and formal one in modern media, also had its role to play. These often rowdy entrepreneurs were usually of lower birth and desperately attempted to make a name and living by ingratiating themselves with wealthy participants. They did so by attracting the most attention possible to themselves and their knights, screaming and blowing trumpets, and could get quite heated when challenged in their field of work. Urban centres, which became increasingly wealthy and politically active starting in the 1100s, took the lead by holding their own military contests. The wealthiest citizens of many of these cities would engage in jousting to celebrate private milestones, like their daughters' weddings, following in the footsteps of the nobility. The warlike Italian communes were the best example of this, as they held various types of competitions, from horse racing to bridge battles. Together with this enhanced social importance came more structure. By the late 13th and early 14th century, jousts were incredibly popular across Western Europe. Great sums of money were invested in setting up and sponsoring them by the higher classes, who extended their influence by hosting these fashionable events. More standardized rules emerged, such as the ones framed by King Alfonso XI of Castile in 1330. Here is one of them as an example. If one knight knocks down both his opponent and his horse, and the other knocks down the knight but not his horse, we declare that the knight whose horse fell with him shall be the winner, because the fault in this case was the horses and not the riders. And in the case of the knight who fell but whose horse did not, the fault rests with the knight and not with the horse. This is only one of the many regulations that were introduced, as they differed from region to region and from period to period. Unsurprisingly and justifiably, no unified, universal set of rules ever existed in jousting, and each aristocratic host would likely impose their own variations. As the practice grew, so did the facilities for it. Jousting arenas grew in size and complexity, with proper dedicated tilt yards and enough seats to house many thousands of spectators. Musical performances and other forms of entertainment also grew in usage and elaboration. The prizes for the winners changed from the losers' horses to fine jewellery like ruby rings and silver belts, or fine armour sets. Full-on markets filled with goods would be set up around the designated place to profit from high-rolling visitors. Jousting equipment changed as well. Whereas in the early days of the tourney, combatants would wear their actual military gear, specialized versions soon emerged. In the times of full plate, dedicated jousting armor was made thicker, heavier, and less flexible to absorb hits better and more safely, and reduce the risk of physical trauma. The level of mobility needed on the real battlefield could be sacrificed in favor of more protection. Specialized helmets, like the rigid frog mouth, were introduced for similar reasons, and to prevent splinters from entering the jouster's eyes. The location of the lance rest and the grappa also made jousting a little safer, though fatal incidents were still fairly frequent. Apart from armor itself, fashion was also very important. While flashy colors and decorations were always a thing on virtually all medieval battlefields, jousts were an occasion for a knight to look as stylish as possible, an occasion to flex his wealth as well as his skills. As a result, elaborate, colourful crests, plumes, icons, and much more were used to embellish jousting armour. This should serve as a reminder of how important fashion and status were in the medieval period. Two different kinds of jousts could be held: the Joust of Peace, for which safer, modified lances were used, and the Joust of War, which featured full-on pointed ones. The latter was seen as more honourable, and competing in it would be undeniable proof of a knight's prowess and courage, as he earned prestige by putting himself through serious, potentially lethal danger. We need to remember that, despite the marked refinement of late medieval jousting compared to its original version, it was still far less a sport than it was a chance to display martial qualities. It was a direct manifestation of medieval mounted military tradition, and consequently of the knightly class's need to prove they could do their job. Still, jousting tournaments eventually took on new functions. Firstly, these huge events were often used for political aims by the powerful. They could serve as symbolic celebrations to negotiate cooperation between different powers, like the one of St. Ingilbert or at Lille in 1453, which was used as a meeting ground to plan a multinational crusade to save Constantinople from the Ottomans. These warrior practices, which had almost become sacraments, were commonly used to draw attention to serious commitments. Under Lorenzo de' Medici, jousting tournaments were encouraged to promote his ideal government, which was supposedly fueled by chivalric values. This was done to win the people over and make them favourable to installing a dynastic regime inside the Republican city of Florence. The new practice of the pas d'armes created a fictional scenario where a combatant held a pass or position against any opponents, who might be supernatural or allegorical beings. For example, in the setting narrative at Bruges in 1463, a knight was taken prisoner by a dwarf. Even if this particular one had to be put off, Burgundy sponsored many other events as part of its grandiose diplomatic plan during the 15th century. It became one of the foremost centres of jousting and chivalric culture, together with Ferrara. In the age of the mercenary, Tournaments also doubled as literal military markets, where bands of knights errant would try their best to attract the attention of noblemen through their military skill, in the hopes of earning a place among their ranks and a stable wage. Of course, the more renowned and able a man-at-arms was confirmed to be, the higher the pay any lord would have been willing to grant him for his services. Jousting arguably reached its all-time peak during the 1400s. In that period, the practice was incredibly popular. While it still retained the original military functions of the High Middle Ages, it also took on several other purposes, covering many aspects of medieval life. It played a huge social role for various classes and served as a versatile political tool. It was an opportunity to prove one's worth, widen one's social net, assert one's influence, express one's artistic vein even, and much, much more. But, as with all things, jousting too eventually fell off. While it remained a favourite for nobles looking to settle disputes through mounted duels, its wider military relevance gradually whittled away. While it is a misconception that heavy cavalry became obsolete in the face of mass gunfire and artillery, it did have to adapt in the 16th century. Likewise, the knightly chivalric values didn't really go away, but they slowly evolved into something else, together with jousting itself. In the Baroque age, things like the carousel or the quintana slowly took the joust's place as the new form of equestrian games and events, and by the 17th century, proper jousting was no more. Indeed, jousts were one of the highest expressions of medieval culture in all its many aspects. Attending one of these breathtaking events would be a priceless window into the multifaceted reality of our past. Studying this far-reaching phenomenon can really open our eyes to the often bloody, yet vibrant and rich history of the Middle Ages. More videos on the medieval period are coming, so make sure to subscribe and press the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.